Hey guys, we had a patron from Patreon send us a message during the week with a link to a story that he'd been reading and asked for some feedback on it, asked for some comment on it. We have actually seen something similar. Actually, we've seen a lot of stuff similar. What it was an event in Tokyo that was called, wait for it, the Robot Marriage Hunting Party. The Robot Marriage Hunting Party. And there is a thing in Japan that's sort of, the idea of it is to meet people, for people to meet people, prospective people to marry. And it can be quite formal, where they all come together and there's 10 men and 10 women and they're all lined up in rows and they sit quite formally and talk to each other. There's all sorts of variations on that. This was just it's sort of really a tech promotion thing by some tech promoting people. And what they did was, the story said that they programmed robots with information about the people. They got the people to complete some questionnaires and then programmed the robots to do a 3-minute introduction of the person, and from the picture that you saw on the thumbnail and just from what it was described as, it's more likely that that robot was nothing more than a tape recorder, really, like a digital version of a tape recorder, pretty much. And they've probably just written a 3-minute blurb about that particular person, and the thing's just spoken it. You know, it's one of those really low-tech type devices, most likely, because I mean, as you saw in that thumbnail, it was sort of a, 8-centimeter high little toy, basically, with probably a microchip in it and a little speaker and not much else. So, yeah, they in the story they said that they asked one of the participants about it. Actually, incidentally too, the people in the thumbnail aren't participants. They weren't actually participants. They were people involved in organising the event. So that photo that was in the thumbnail was used in the story, and it was sort of basically a recreation of what was actually happening. It wasn't actually the genuine people themselves. And they said that they asked one of the people that participated, and that person said that the robot made it easier to connect with the other person. So, yeah, I mean, of course, that's the person that that apparently said that. As for what happened after that 3 minutes, so basically they've sat down, one robot, I hesitate to call it a robot, one device, because it's not really a robot, is it? It's overused. A lot of this tech stuff is it's tech promotion stuff. 9 times out of 10, it's just some tech company trying to get their name out there, and it works because the media pick up on it. And of course, what happens is once it gets in the media, the mainstream international media pick up on it, and then it becomes one of those quirky little things from Japan that inevitably someone's going to call it the latest trend from Japan, when in actual fact, out of 127 million people, it was 10 people that were doing this one-off event. So, but no doubt what'll happen is the international media will pick up on it at some stage and report on it as the latest trend from Japan. This is how people in Japan are meeting their marriage partners now and all that. This is how those myths get started, So basically they sat down opposite each other at the table, and the device basically spoke for 3 minutes and introduced the person, and then the other person's device spoke for three minutes and introduced the person, which is no different really from a third party sitting down with them and introducing them. Is it really? This is so-and-so, this is what they do for a living, this is how old they are, this is what they're interested in. It's basically the same thing, isn't it? It's a substitute for a third party introducing them, or just reading each other's resumes, or even old technology. Those dating sites and dating companies used to record people, didn't they, with video cameras, and then people would sit and watch that. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's nothing more special than that. The only difference is they call them robots, and we see a lot of that here. We see a lot of that here where there's really low-tech stuff, like, people waiting in line at the restaurant and they have to put down their name, and the old style is to write it in a book, whereas occasionally now what you'll come across is a device standing there, and you say your name and it keeps your name, and puts it on a list, or there'll be a screen, touch screen, and you put your name down using the touch screen, but it's got a head on it and eyes, so people call it a robot, you know. We made a video about one of those. So yeah, it's supposed to impress people, but no doubt, you know, the real IT people, the real techies out there will look at stuff like that and go, yeah, there's nothing high tech about that. That's all quite simple. The other point of view, and we get this quite a lot here, it's been a bit of an issue this week, is when there's a human weakness or a human, in this case it was they're shy, they have trouble sitting down across from each other and talking, they're shy, so this robot is the solution. That was the angle that the story was taking, which, if you look at it from that point of view, it might break the ice for the first 3 minutes, but when that robot stops talking, you know, the human skills are going to kick in, aren't they? They're going to be necessary, aren't they, for them to be able to communicate for the next 3 minutes. So it doesn't really solve the shy problem, but this is what we see a lot of in Japan. When there's human weaknesses, or when there's human communications or relationship type points like this, or issues like this, where they'll sort of half-heartedly try to solve it with technology. Another big example that we see a lot is the language thing. And interestingly, when Tokyo won the 2020 Olympics, a few years ago, we actually mentioned it in a video at the time that the government was saying, right, we won the 2020 Olympics, before 2020, we need to improve our English level, because the government talks about it now and again, as we've mentioned before, because they're aware of the fact that Japan ranks really low in the ability to communicate in English. And so when they won the 2020 Olympics, there was this big talk about how, right, we've got to improve our English skills before 2020. And we made a video at that time sort of laughing at that, really, because it's just not going to happen, you know. And we said at the time, it's not going to happen. They're not going to suddenly magically increase the proficiency level in English in Japan before 2020, and we said it wasn't going to happen. And it hasn't happened, mainly because they didn't do anything. The government said that the universities had to start testing people, their English ability, before they get into university, which testing their level only shows you how bad their level is. It doesn't improve their level, does it, you know? And basically they didn't change anything. So the problem is, as we've talked about before, the reason the English level is so bad is because it's not treated like communication. It's just treated like something that the kids at school are supposed to memorize. And it's not used for communication, so they're no good at using it for communication, basically. But the way it connects to this story is that what they then decided to do, they have, in fairness, they have actually, not employed, but they have actually taken on volunteers to work at the Olympics, and one of the things that they were looking for in the volunteers was the ability to speak other languages, right? So not just English, but a variety of other languages. So they have done that, in fairness. There's human beings communicating with human beings, so they have done that. However, what we see more of is that you know, we want to be able to communicate with the foreigners when they come for the Olympics, so we've got these new robots. They're going to explain things to everybody, and because you guys know about the Setsume, we've talked about the Setsume before. So they're going to have robots all over the place, or not robots, devices. They call them robots because it sounds techo and impressive, doesn't it? But they're really just devices, aren't they? Devices all over the place that are going to be communicating with the foreigners, right? And basically telling you the rules. So it's going to be a bunch of recordings, isn't it, in multiple languages, telling you how to do things and telling you the rules and telling you all that sort of stuff. And so you can see what's happened. They've sort of folded. The plan was by 2020 we'll all speak English really well, and then that didn't happen. All right, well let's get some technology involved and see if technology can fill the gap. And of course it does to a certain extent, but in the end it really doesn't, does it? The other thing that triggered this video, we had the one message from the guy on Patreon, but we also met up with one of our friends this week, and he's a dentist, and he'd been over to another country, Thailand, to play golf. And before he went, he showed us this little device he had, this little oval shaped device. And, you know, translator, he was saying, it's the latest translator and it's expensive. We didn't ask him how much it was, but it's expensive. And he was saying it can speak all these different languages and translate all these different languages, and it actually had different choices for, like for in English, you could choose American English or British English or Australian English, and you could choose which type of English you wanted to speak and all this sort of thing. And he tried to demonstrate it to us. You know, speak now, he was saying, speak now, and was sort of playing around with it for a while to try and demonstrate how it worked, and it didn't work. It basically didn't work. It worked a bit when he spoke into it, and then did some translation of simple stuff, but it didn't understand anything that I was saying. So it just didn't work. It was a bit of a failure, and he sort of put it away, and we didn't talk about it again. And then when he came back from Thailand, I said to him, "How was your device? Did you use your device? You know, how was your device?" And he said it didn't really work. He said there was a couple of times where they were somewhere quiet where he got a chance to set it up, where he spoke and used it, and then went and played what he just set up to a member of the staff in the hotel or whatever, and they managed to understand what it was saying, but it just failed, you know. And this is the thing, we're seeing those sorts of things advertised a lot. So we see them on the internet in Japan, because of course our ads here are different from the ads you see on the internet. We see ones that are aimed at Japanese people, so they're in Japanese, and we'll see them, particularly on YouTube. You see videos of these amazing devices that can translate any language, and you know, they go on about, and they show people standing there, you know, Japanese people standing there talking to some tall, blonde-haired, European-looking dude, you know, and they're speaking, and he's understanding, and they're all smiling and happy and enjoying the experience, and it's all wonderful. We see a lot of that on television and on the internet. And the other thing that we see a lot of is advertising for English learning programs, and they're really popular here, where people will buy. There's one called Speed Learning, where they buy books and CDs, and they listen to the CD and they read the book. And I mean, you know, stuff like that. Obviously, it helps to a certain extent, doesn't it? But it's not going to teach people to communicate. You know, and the point is that this seems to be a thing when there's weaknesses in human relationship type things, which is basically what communication is, isn't it? So if there's a weakness in regards to human communication or human relationships, they seem to turn, oh, what can we do? Oh, let's get a device. And obviously those sort of solutions are promoted by the IT people, aren't they? The companies that are trying to make money out of it. But it does seem to be a really popular response here to these sorts. Instead of saying, right, you know, they actually discuss those rankings of the different countries and their English proficiency level, and because there's a bunch of European countries that rank highest, and then there's different ones, and then it comes down, and then it's, you know, it's the Philippines, and it's India, and it's all these other countries, and South Korea, and then finally it gets to Japan down the bottom, you know. And instead of going to Europe and watching how English is actually taught there, and why, researching why it is that the people in those countries, you know, speak much better English than the Japanese people do, instead of doing that, they always try to find these tech-based ways, you know. Well, let's get some technology involved and see if that'll fix it, you know. And of course it doesn't, does it? Because it's talking about human relationships and human communications, and there isn't a piece of tech that's going to solve that, is it? You know, and you know, wanting to connect with people and communicate with people. You see it on YouTube all the time. Rarely do we see a comment on our videos in a language other than English. Most of the people who watch our videos are from all over the world, and they'll leave comments underneath these videos in English. And you know, some of the grammar's not perfect, but everybody's communicating in English. But we know that more than half of you guys watching this aren't from English-speaking countries where your first language is in English. And you're all communicating with each other in English, and then along comes the Japanese person who doesn't like the video because we said something that might be critical of Japan, and leaves that angry comment in Japanese because they've watched the video listening to Google Translate, and then they've left an angry comment in Japanese because they don't have the ability to speak English or write English. And you know, this is the sort of thing we see all the time, and then they think that the solution is the tech. You know, there was a big debate that day. The guy was showing us his device. Someone else had their smartphone, and they had their Google translator on there, and they were using that as well. And I mean, all those things, you know, the devices outside the restaurant and the devices at the Olympics that they're going to use, and these translation devices that people are using, and you know, Google Translate and all those things. Of course, you know, they're a handy tool to a certain extent, aren't they? But it's not enough, is it? Obviously, you know, it's not going to solve the relationship thing. Let's solve the fact that people aren't getting married and having kids with a piece of technology. And because no one really believes that, there's a good chance that the company that actually promoted that event, they don't believe it's going to change anything either, really. All they're doing it for is to get their name in the media, really. That's all they're really doing. They don't really think that's going to change relationships and suddenly solve Japan's population problem, that suddenly using this little device everybody's going to start hooking up and getting married and stuff. They know it's not going to change anything, you know, but they like talking about it like it will, and they like pretending that it will, you know. It's like a lie agreed upon, isn't it? Where they're sort of pretending that yeah, that's a good thing. And the media too, there's a good chance that they don't believe any of it either. When they write these stories about it, there's a good chance they don't believe it's going to change anything. And the inevitably you're going to read a story about this where somebody, oops, we just lost our front camera, sorry guys. But inevitably you're going to read a story about this from some international media where they say it's the latest trend from Japan, no doubt. And there's a good chance the person who writes that piece of nonsense won't be believing it either. That they're just saying it because, you know, it makes a good headline and it gets people to read their article or watch their news clipping or whatever it is that they're trying to get us to do. Clickbait, isn't it, really? So yeah, this should go on the myths playlist, this one, because this is how these things get started. It's not a myth yet, but it soon will be. It soon will be, you know, and we're always seeing this, and it's sort of how these things get rolling, is that a company does it to promote themselves and get their name out there, and they don't really believe it's going to make any difference. And they know the weaknesses in what they've developed, and they're translating software and that sort of stuff, and they're, you know, let's hook people up to get married software or device. They know it's not going to make any difference, but they do it to get their name out there, and the media like it because it makes a good headline, you know. What was it called? The robot marriage meeting up, hooking up, well, the robot marriage hunting party. You know, everyone's got to read that, haven't they? Find out what that's about. So that's how these things get rolling, you know. And then before you know it, it's in the international media and it's written up like everyone's doing it. So when you read that story about how it's the latest trend in Japan and everybody's doing it, just remember 127 million people in Japan, 10 people took part in that event, right? So, you know, that's how it gets started, isn't it? Anyway, there it was. Sorry we lost the front camera. No idea. That keeps happening. It just doesn't seem to it gets bored. The talking must be too much for it and it gets bored. So anyway, all good. More videos coming soon.